Wow, when I saw this stack of articles and that YouTube transcript all about Asia and space, I was like, okay, this is going to be good. Like, are we talking like spaceships with samurai swords? Where's this going?
Well, maybe not spaceships with samurai swords, but
Yeah.
it's definitely captivating stuff.
Yeah.
It's way more than just a race, though. We're talking geopolitics, tech, economics, you name it. It's a whole new playing field for, well, global ambition and all that.
Right. So we've got these articles, they're really digging into like the specific goals of different Asian space programs, right? And then we've got this YouTube analysis from South China Morning Post, and they're calling it a new world order, which is, well, that's a statement.
Yeah, it really is. And it shows how different this whole thing is from, say, the U.S.-Soviet space race. I mean, understanding that history is important, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But now we're talking multiple players. China, India, Japan, they're all major players now.
Yeah.
Alongside, the more established agencies, NASA, the ESA, the whole gang's here.
It's like multiplayer mode activated or something. But here's what gets me. With everyone crowding the cosmic arena, there's still like a surprising amount of teamwork going on.
Oh, absolutely. Cooperation is like a hallmark of this new space age. Look at the Artemis Accords, for example. This agreement, it's spearheaded by the U.S., sure, but it's trying to set up some ground rules for everyone for lunar exploration, resources, all that. And many countries, Japan, India, they've signed on. So it seems like they're at least willing to, play nice, even with all the competition and whatnot.
Yeah. So it's not just us versus them anymore.
Nope. It's way more complicated than that. This YouTube video, it actually said there are now 77 space agencies worldwide. 77. Yeah. That just shows how much has changed.
77. Okay, that's a lot of cooks in the cosmic kitchen. But how does that change the recipe? Does it make countries more likely to team up, or does it, turn up the heat on the competition?
Well, that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, the answer is probably a bit of both. We're seeing both cooperation and competition all mixed up, which is what makes this whole thing so interesting to watch.
So we've got this like balancing act going on, right, between working together and racing ahead. But let's zoom in here. One thing that really jumped out from these articles, China's space program. I mean, they're going for it. One article even mentioned that between 2018 and 2022, they launched more rockets, more than anyone else. So what's the takeaway there?
It's not just about how many rockets, though, right? Although, yeah, that's impressive. It's more about the strategy. They're going for this high-cadence launch thing, basically always putting stuff up in space, more data, testing tech faster, and it lets them control how everyone sees their space program.
So it's about like momentum, right, and how they're perceived, just as much as, the actual technology.
Exactly. And that plays right into their big goals. I mean, they've been very open about wanting to put astronauts on the moon by 2030, and then a permanent research station at the lunar South Pole by 2036. That's ambitious.
Yeah.
But with all these launches, they seem pretty serious.
And don't forget their Mars mission, landing that rover back in 2022. That was huge.
Yeah.
Now they're talking about bringing back samples by 2030. That's a whole other level.
It really is. And to do that, they're building this massive rocket, the Long March 9. It's meant to carry, like, huge stuff into orbit. Imagine this thing could help build, like, a whole base on the moon. Or even send people to Mars someday.
Wow. Okay, so China's, like, aiming for the top spot. That's clear. But what about the others? India, for example, they've been making some pretty big moves too, right?
Oh, absolutely. India landing on the moon's South Pole in 2023, that was huge.
Yeah.
Especially with all the technical stuff. Like, that's not an easy place to land.
Yeah.
That really showed everyone they're a serious contender in this space game.
I know. It was like edge of your seat watching that landing. They had to land that thing perfectly, avoiding craters, boulders, everything. And now, like China, they're also aiming for their own space station by 2035.
Yeah, and what's interesting about India is their focus on teamwork. Like, they're doing this mission with Japan, the LUPEX mission, to study lunar water ice.
Right. Japan, the OG spacefaring nation. They've been at this for decades. They're like the veterans showing up to this new space race.
They really do bring that experience and a track record. Their HIIA rocket.
Okay.
Almost perfect launch success rate. They might not be the loudest, but their steady progress, the technology, it speaks for itself.
Okay, so we've got China going big, building fast, India strategically partnering up, making huge leaps, and then Japan, the steady veteran, always innovating. It's wild to think all this is happening right now. This isn't some sci-fi movie. This is the world we live in.
And it's not just, about national pride or science experiments. This stuff, It actually affects all of us down here on Earth.
That's what I was thinking. It's cool to follow, sure. But what about, like, the everyday person? Why should they care about what's happening millions of miles away?
So we've talked about how this new space race is, well, it's about more than just getting to the moon first, right? It affects everything, global power, technology, resources, you name it. But something you said earlier, it really got me thinking, how does this whole, let's work together, let's beat everyone else thing, how does that actually work in space? It's a tough balance, that's for sure.
Right.
On the one hand, you've got projects like the International Space Station. I mean, that thing, it shows what we can do when we actually share resources, share knowledge. Even with, all the stuff happening down here on Earth, countries have kept that thing running for decades. It's incredible.
It really is. But then there's the whole race for resources. Developing tech that could be, used for, well, not so peaceful purposes. That's where it gets a little messy.
Exactly. When we start talking about, like, mining asteroids, setting up shop on the moon, the stakes get a lot higher. There's a lot of money involved, sure, but also whoever controls those resources, that's power. So naturally, countries get a little more, shall we say, protective of their own interests.
Yeah, like, let's work together, but also I'm watching you.
Right. And that's where things like, the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, they come in. That treaty, it was written during the Cold War. The idea was to keep space a peaceful place. No weapons, just exploration.
Which sounds great, but in reality, it's probably not that simple.
You got it. One of the sources even pointed out that the treaty, it's a little vague, especially now with all the tech we have compared to, like, 1967.
Yeah.
For example, asteroid mining, using space resources. That wasn't really a thing back then. So the treaty doesn't really say.
Right.
And when you have different countries interpreting those gray areas, well, it can create some tension.
And with so much at stake, it seems like that could easily lead to, actual conflict.
It definitely adds another layer, no question.
Yeah.
But look, space doesn't have to become another battleground. What happens next, it depends on what we do today. Diplomacy, private companies, even just, focusing on shared scientific goals.
Yeah.
All of that will shape how this space race goes.
It's exciting, but it's also, like, a little nerve-wracking, So many possibilities, but also this uncertainty.
For sure, and I think that's what makes it so fascinating. We're at this turning point, a new era in space, and it's happening right now. The sources even mentioned South Korea launching their own rocket recently. The more players that enter the space arena, the more interesting it's going to get.
It's like the rules are constantly changing. New players are joining the game. So for our listeners today, what's the main takeaway? What do we want them to remember?
I think the biggest thing is the future of space. It's not set in stone. It's something we're all creating together and through our individual actions. So the next time you look up at the night sky, yeah, be amazed by it, but also feel that sense of responsibility, because what happens out there, it starts down here with us.
Wow, that's a powerful thought. And on that note, I want to thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the new space race. It's complex, it's always changing, but one thing's for sure, it's a journey worth following. Until next time, keep looking up and keep asking questions.